Started. The next session is around building high-performing teams using data and assessments. So we can get started. Okay. Okay, hi everybody. As I just said, what we're doing right now is a session on building high-performing teams with data and assessments, and I have Erica here from GoEasy. She actually is joining us from vacation in Hawaii, so very nice of her to join us. And maybe, Erica, you can introduce yourself.
Sure, thank you. Can everyone hear me? All
Yeah.
good? So thank you so much. And yes, sorry to make everyone jealous, but I am joining from Hawaii. But my name is Erica. I'm the Director of Organizational Development at GoEasy. GoEasy is a subprime lender based in Canada. And I've been with GoEasy for about a year and a half or so, but prior to that, I was in a variety of different consulting roles in which my background stems from industrial organizational psychology. So that's how I ended up in this position.
Okay, I know for me, and maybe it's the same for a lot of people in the room, that this is a pretty new topic for me. I've only seen assessments of employees, at the end of an interview process, or maybe I've gone through it myself. So maybe, Erica, just to kind of get everybody up to speed, you can speak about the different assessment tools that you work with and what they are.
Sure. So in terms of the types of assessments that we leverage at GoEasy, it's a combination of ones that measure potential and ones that measure performance. That's typically the dichotomy that we look at. And then when we're talking about potential, usually that is based out of psychometric assessments. So in other words, a personality test. And so at GoEasy, we use a combination of, we use one primary psychometric assessment that we're quite committed to, as well as performance appraisals based off of the individual competencies and goals that one might have for their role. We leverage other ways to look at the two performance versus potential aspects in comparison to each other. So we leverage a version of the 9-box. We have a variety of different competency models for functional roles, leadership roles, what we're looking for in high potentials. So I would say the best way to leverage assessments and data is a multi-pronged approach.
So again, when I've dealt with it before, it's usually been the end of the process. So they've now selected one person. We're going to invest in that one person to do the testing. But in talking to you, and just my guess is that's not best practice. So speak to me when the best time to introduce testing is through the hiring practice.
Yeah, as early as you possibly can. So that is typically, again, it's something that we think that we should only introduce at the end of the process, because maybe you want to only invest in your top candidates. Maybe again, what you're leveraging is best for later on in the process. Perhaps your assessment, you don't want to deter any candidates too early in the process, and this is one of those things where you're looking at the theory versus practice, like what's the best way to do it versus what's actually realistic. And so for us, we try to introduce assessments as early as possible into the hiring process. And the reason why we do that, so for one thing, an assessment, specifically a personality assessment, should never be used as the deciding factor for if you hire somebody. And typically that's what ends up happening when you use it at the end of the process. You maybe you have two candidates and you end up choosing the one that has the better personality profile. And while there is some merit in that, that's not necessarily the best way to go about things. Consequently, you have your final candidate and you've already fallen in love with them. And then you test them at the end of the process, and there are some red flags that come up through the psychometric assessment. What now ends up happening is you've either got confirmation bias, you ignore those red flags, because again, we've gone through this grueling hiring process, especially if it's for a role that has high turnover, it's niche, it's something that, it's not necessarily easy to hire for. And so we end up ignoring those red flags, or we don't test for them. So as early in the process as you possibly can. Assessments also should only be considered for up to 10 to 20% of the decision that that's being made. So you want to use, the person's prior experience, their references, how they show up in the interview process, prior results, etc., in conjunction with the psychometric assessment. And another benefit of doing it early is that if you have a wider set of candidates that you're testing, you can leverage the data throughout the process to, probe for these things. You can use it in reference checks. You can arm your interviewers with aspects that showed up in the data that we're not necessarily comfortable with. So let's figure out a way to test for it and ask about, how they've handled these things in the past, or certain skills or behaviors that they've leveraged to be able to remediate that, for example. So as early as you possibly can in the process, without deterring your candidates, without going over your hiring budget, that's typically what's recommended.
So what I'm hearing and what you're saying is by having it earlier in the process, it's really helping to drive the process. It's not
Yes.
It's not a deciding factor. It's helping to drive
No.
how you interview, how you do all of the elements of the process. Is that correct?
100%. So I'll give you an example. So say that you have a candidate that shows up, again, really well in terms of what you're looking for. And then on the psychometric assessment, and typically psychometric assessments measure not only, again, when I say personality, that's also, motivators, how they interact with other people, but also things like their detail orientation and how they structure themselves. And so, for example, if the role that you're looking for requires someone who's very self-disciplined, motivated, a self-starter, for example, and they have typical aspects in their profile that show up as maybe it's not a natural tendency for them. So maybe they're not naturally very structured. Maybe they're not naturally very self-disciplined, but they have had this great career and they showcase a lot of potential and fit for the role that you're hiring for. You can then use that data to probe further in the interview process. So, I see that perhaps you have these lower levels of self-structure or self-discipline. What are some tactics or strategies you've leveraged to still get this far in your career? And humans are not defined by one trait. So we often rely on other aspects of our personality and other tendencies that allow us to still be successful. And so you're not writing that candidate off. You're just understanding how they've operated, how they've, showed up in the past and built out these strategies to still be successful. And then you can make that decision around, is this going to still be a fit for our environment? And can I work with this person?
Okay. There are a lot of people here in this room that are contact center leaders. I have not seen, again, these sort of tools used for contact center agents because of the volume and because the competency were different from some of the other corporate roles. So because I know you and I talked, you said it can be used from a high volume. So how do you do that with that, specifically that type of role, a contact center agent?
Yeah, 100% it's difficult. So a couple answers to that question. One is I encourage you to take the time to develop the competency model for that contact center agent. It's a high volume role. It's worth the investment. And so in that process, you would go through what we call a typical job analysis process. And I would encourage you, if you don't have the internal tools, to then seek an external support to help you develop that competency model. Ultimately, it's just articulating, okay, what are the top skills, behaviors, areas of knowledge that really drive success in that role. And I would always recommend conducting that process so that you have that model and you get really clear and specific about what you're looking for outside of the results that person should be bringing in, right? Because you also want to identify, okay, what behaviors potentially drive those results. So above above everything, develop that competency model. From an assessment perspective, I completely understand from a scaling aspect, if it could potentially be a deterrent for candidates in the hiring process. So I'd recommend finding an assessment that measures what you'd be looking for and doesn't collect what I call flimsy data. So there's a lot of assessments out there that are cheap. They take about 10 minutes to complete. And it can just be like one aspect of the hiring process. And at the end of the day, you're not really collecting great data, because any assessment that only takes a few minutes to complete is only collecting the data of that person's mood most of the time in that moment. And so it's not necessarily accurate or sustainable over time. I would recommend something that takes between 20 to 30 minutes, is statistically valid, has aspects to really back it up in terms of the science behind it, and also is within your price point. If that is going to be a deterrent for candidates in the hiring process, we don't have the budget for an assessment in the hiring process for a specific contact center agent, for example, perhaps we only use it for manager levels and above, then at least you have that competency model that articulates, again, what we're really looking for from a behavioral perspective when we're hiring a contact center agent, and then you can weave that into your interview process. So that's another option if you're not going to use an assessment.
So you'd build that in conjunction with somebody like yourself or HR,
Yeah.
come up with that, and then ensure through your screening process, your interview processes, that's kind of weaved into it. Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, exactly. It's just about getting really articulate and clear about what you're looking for, again, above and beyond those results that this person would be expected to achieve.
Okay. So the other thing I've noticed in the little experience I have with these testing is that it's done when you're about to hire. As a leader, I've been told, okay, these are things to look at for this person, and then I don't even see the results most of the time. I'm just kind of told that, and then we never talk about it again. We hire that person,
Yeah.
and we kind of forget about all that testing. In talking to you,
Yeah.
I see that, again, as not best practice, that you really need to
No.
evolve it through the whole employee journey. So speak a bit about that.
100%, yeah. So an assessment can be weaved into the entire employee life cycle. And it really depends on what you're looking for. So at GoEasy, for example, we, and I give credit to the leaders of our HR department, extremely progressive. They were leveraging assessments a decade ago. And we leverage it as part of, again, the entire employee life cycle. So at time of hire, exactly what I've just spoken about. So again, does this person naturally show up in a way that we can work with them and it wouldn't be difficult for them to do the job? That's ultimately what you're looking for when you test is, does this person have some natural tendencies that will allow them to perform in the role that you are hiring for under pressure, because they naturally do it. So that's the time of selection. From an onboarding perspective, we usually share the results, and again, in a multi-pronged approach. So we'll share the results with the new hire for self-awareness purposes, right? So again, we share the information about themselves, the data, have a really productive conversation about how that has showed up in their career and how, areas to focus on as they move forward. We also share it with their new manager. So their manager knows, okay, this person has these areas for me to really focus and coach on. Here's the best way for me to manage this person, knowing what the job is going to entail. And then even further, and we do this as well, team-based. So if everybody on your team is tested in the exact same way and you have data on that team, you can conduct a session where you share all that data with the team, and it really contributes to building strong team dynamics. So onboarding and then sort of moving forward, and then that sort of bleeds into coaching as well. Again, your manager will know what to coach for. And then, especially as you think about, okay, what's next for this person, which I think we'll get into our next topic too, Deanna, but if we think about what's next for this person, does this person showcase traits, behaviors, competencies, however you want to call it, that lend itself to getting to the next level, which would be assuming a team lead, a team manager type of role.
So in terms of promotions, so say somebody came in, they did the testing, and like 4 years later, you're looking at a promotion. Are you looking at
Yep.
that data from when they came in, or are you retesting? Because they might have changed, evolved.
Yeah, so this is sort of the age old conversation around assessments. When you're measuring a personality or someone's
change.
personality, it doesn't change unless you go through some sort of major life event, which I would argue post COVID, that data would be different. That was a source of societal trauma. But if you're measuring behaviors change.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
The way somebody shows up on the surface, that changes, but their innate personality, it doesn't change. You could be looking at the same data depending on the rigor of the assessment that you do use. But you would just be looking at it from a different lens.
Okay.
And this is another big topic where too often, especially in a contact center environment, you may have really successful agents and associates. And this is within any organization. We think they're really strong, they're really successful, let's promote them to be a manager. But we aren't looking at any managerial or leadership traits and tendencies. We're still looking at just their results. And we assume this person has great results, they're going to be a great manager. So you have to shift your lens, because at the end of the day, and it's okay. And I think this is such a, it's almost like a bad word, for example, to say like this person can just be a lifelong sort of individual contributor. If they're pumping out results and they don't want to manage people, that should be okay. Whereas someone who maybe has average or mediocre results, but they showcase areas that, would lend themselves to be a really strong manager, for example. Maybe they have amazing communication, maybe they're really great at motivating other people, then that would potentially be a great move for that person. It just depends on looking for the right things when you're looking at someone for promotion.
I think that's really critical. I knew when I was at Porter and we grew the contact center so much, and we were just hiring so much. So, and as you're hiring new agents, you've got to add on leads, you got to add on supervisors. That's exactly what we looked at. Okay, they're meeting their performance metrics, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they necessarily can lead. And that's something that we learned and modified how we were then moving people into those roles. And kind of on that
100%.
topic then, how do you combine, because you have a lot of performance data in contact center, and what I learned going to the contact center, you have more than most other departments. How do you take that performance data and align that with your personality data and competency data?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's two aspects. And one thing I would really encourage folks to do is when you're looking at something like performance data versus potential, which I've mentioned again, potential we measure through typically someone's natural tendencies, their personality. I would also add in, from a performance data perspective, data around how that person shows up in terms of their behaviors. So not only just did they meet their goals, and this is something that we do at GoEasy as well, where our performance appraisals include someone's goals, metrics, results, but also how they show up from a behavioral perspective and is it in alignment with what we expect of them. So are they showing up as a really strong organizational citizen? Are they, a really great team player? Are they showcasing behaviors that also are in alignment with the results that they're getting? So for example, are they a really great, again, influencer? They're super persuasive. They're great with customers. Perhaps they're very service oriented and that allows them to achieve their specific results. So I would combine those two things, especially since, again, if we look at the results like CSAT, for example, in isolation, sometimes we miss critical data. So for example, maybe it's the region that person has. Maybe it's the types of customers that person typically deals with that allows them to have higher volume, higher results, but maybe it's not necessarily that person. So if we really look into, again, not just their results, but the behaviors driving it, and that can be collected through 360 data, their own self-reporting, their manager rating them on specific behaviors as well, their peers. Then we can get a really clear and broader picture on how this person shows up and what their longevity in the organization could look like.
Okay. I don't think we can do one session without talking about AI, so I will bring that in
Of
here
course.
as well. But how I want to ask this really is around what changes are you seeing in this industry, in the assessment industry, as routine roles are being automated, and how is the assessments evolving as AI is changing works and roles?
Yeah, so I think we're still trying to figure out the right things to measure when it comes to introducing AI. I think that we're actually a couple steps ahead of ourselves. Automation, AI, the introduction of changing the way that we go to work and the way that we do work. We are remiss if we go straight to trying to measure what drives that performance before thinking about change management. So I don't think we spend enough time talking about change management and thinking about change management. I think that especially if you've got folks, and again with GoEasy, so we've been an organization for over 20 years, and we have highly tenured folks who are really, they're extremely loyal to the organization. They've been here since the beginning, and their jobs have continuously changed. And we're remiss if we ever introduce a new form of them going to work or doing their job without engaging in the proper change management tools and tactics. So, it's making sure that we're introducing the automation in a way that allows this person to adopt their new way of working. We can't look at humans like machines, right? They've been doing their job in one way for so long, and they've built confidence from that. They feel comfortable doing that. They've gotten results from that. And when you have a group of really passionate employees who are very attached to their results, and now all of a sudden we're changing how they achieve those results, they're going to go through sort of like that period of despair where they're like, I don't know how to do my job anymore. So we need to make sure that we're engaging in the right change tactics. And then, only then, once we are successful in incorporating those, a different way of going to work, then we can start to measure, okay, what allowed that person to really adopt that change in an easier and, more seamless way. And the typical ones, right, like what we're looking for is like adjustment to change, a willingness to change, flexibility, right, like those things. I would also say a level of resilience and confidence.
Yeah.
Right? Because again, if you are somebody that really attaches perhaps your value to your work and it's really tied to that, changing the way that you do your work. And sorry, I'm a psychologist, so I'm starting to speak like this, but changing the way that you do your work can really impact somebody's confidence in the way that they add value. So change first, focusing on that change management piece. And then let's start to think about what would drive the adoption of AI, automation, et cetera.
Yeah, I think that's really critical. Is something I've been saying as well, because I think we're just jumping to, okay, we need to put in AI in an organization. One of the things I've said, we need to say, what are we trying to solve? What's our objective? But we also need to understand what's the human element. Even if you're eliminating roles, there still is human element. And then how do we get with that element? How do we manage the change so they are involved and integrated into the process?
Exactly. Yeah. The worst thing that anyone could ever do is just introduce a change and just assume that someone's going to adopt it immediately and we're going to continue business as usual.
Yeah. Okay, that's the end of my questions, but is there any questions in the room or online? Oh, we got one here. You can't see everybody, I guess, but.
No, I can't.
Yeah.
Oh, hi. Yes. Yeah.
It's too formal like that. Is there a way to effectively scan or measure for combativeness with change beforehand, like during the interview process? Because I know that like we ask certain questions to determine like agreeability and that kind of thing, but
Yep.
who I find are, really ambitious people who do care a lot about their work, that you can't
Yep.
tell early on that they're going to be combative about change, which is inevitable
Mm-hmm.
in industries.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Can you, yeah, so keep the mic because I have a follow-up question. Can you share a little bit more about the combativeness? Like, what does that look like?
So, like, minor policy changes could seem like nothing to coach on, but then it turns out, oh, this is a big problem because, this changes how I do this, and like, why are we doing it? Whatever it is, there's 100
Yeah.
questions, but you can't answer all of them, and it just becomes like it snowballs into like, I have a problem with you making changes in general, and
100%.
yeah, so like, I
Yeah.
guess just identifying that in an interview process would be really nice, but
Mm-hmm.
there's some, like a personality test that determines that, so that you can coach on it, kind of, so that
Yeah.
they learn that they have that.
Yes, 100%. So I have a couple answers to that question. So from a typical trait-based response, I would say looking at things like flexibility and then on the contrary, rigidity. I would look at things like accommodation, which is interesting, but when somebody is extremely service oriented and willing to make changes for the sake of other people, they'll still do it, right? They might be more inclined to make that change because it's best for the organization, and et cetera, et cetera. Looking at somebody's motivators. So if they're really motivated by achieving goals, if they're really motivated by relationships, service, whatever it is, that can also help you coach that person through it. So for example, hey, we're making this change to allow you to do your job better, which can then ultimately lead to greater results, right? So it's all about sort of how do we mitigate the resistance to the change? But that's really more around coaching.
Yeah.
I would also recommend or highly recommend something called the SCARF assessment. So it's just spelled like SCARF, SCARF. It is based in from the Neuro Leadership Institute, I believe, and it's coined by a neuroscientist named David Rock. And basically, that's a 5-minute assessment. Not measuring someone's personality, so I do condone it only being 5 minutes, but that measures somebody's stress triggers. So it stands for like SCARF stands for status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness. And so you can have somebody go through that 2-3 minute assessment, and you can identify, okay, what's going to cause this person the most stress, and then you can coach around it. So for example, if it's certainty, and you're introducing a new change that doesn't necessarily have an end result and the environment is still very ambiguous, that person might be resistant to the change because they don't know what's happening next. So you can manage that if you can provide hopefully enough answers for that person, and you know that your processes allow that to be, when you introduce a change, it's end to end, like what's happening. Or if you operate in a highly ambiguous environment and this person really needs a lot of certainty, perhaps they're not a fit for your business.
Right.
So SCARF assessment.
SCARF assessment. Thank
And
you.
it's free.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nice. Thanks.
Any other questions? I don't know if we have, one more? Is that okay? Okay, last question.
Hi, Nadine from Securian Canada. I just have one question in terms of your views. What do you think about things like Harrison assessment and MBTI in this sort of scenario in today's age?
Sorry, you guys all just actively saw me roll my eyes when you said MBTI. I'm so sorry, and my head is probably gigantic, so couldn't hide that. I am not a fan of an MBTI, a DISC. Those are really the two that kind of pop into my head, because if you think about it, they take 5 to 10 minutes to complete. The results really depend heavily on your mood. So that can really contaminate the data that you're using. And at that point, it's like if you're using it for hiring, it's like, what's the point, right? Because you're not going to get really good data. I am a big fan of, I like Hogan. any assessments that Hogan offers, and that is not sponsors. We don't use Hogan at GoEC, but I've always been a big fan because of the science behind it, and I think there's a lot of different different types of assessments that you can use, and it's generally very science based. So I'm a big fan of Hogan. I'm a big fan of Plum. I'm a Waterloo graduate, and that's based in Waterloo. So big fan of that. Doesn't take you too long. So I would just encourage you to really do your research. And if you're looking to choose an assessment, ask the questions around how consistent is this data going to be? How valid is this data going to be? And you take the assessment, right? And you articulate and try to decide, is this, accurate enough for me to make a decision about a person that I'm going to hire for? So
Okay.
I don't love the MBTI, don't love a disc. That's just the IO in me, being very honest. So
Okay, I'm going to end now. We're a little bit over time, but thank you very much and enjoy the rest of your
Thank
vacation
you.
in Hawaii.
sorry.
Yeah.
Thank you all.
Bye.